All right. So, I'm Wesley Mobeck, and this is my brother,
Kieren Mobeck.
and this is the final presentation for our game Siege. Thank you all for coming. Hey, Mr. Henderson.
Oh.
Sorry. So, our company is called Eisenreich Studios. It is German for Iron Giant. It depicts a clenched fist, which shows basically our determination and passion that we are putting into the project, or rather, that we have put into our project. The red coloring also helps to show those same things. So, me and Wesley are fraternal twins, actually, and we are seniors here at Grandview High School. And I was actually, at the age of 3, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And both of us are interested in making our own games, for now and future. So, what exactly is Siege? Well, Siege is the game we decided to create, which is a class-based first-person multiplayer game with a medieval setting. The demo includes 3 playable classes, 1 playable map, and a free-for-all game mode. So, some of our objectives for the project is to learn how to code in Unity and C#. I also wanted to figure out how to make good-looking 3D models in Blender. And another objective of mine is to improve my speaking skills, so we'll see how that goes. And I want to make our game, Siege, a dedicated project for the future. My objectives, on the other hand, are very similar to his, which is understanding the C# programming language. And I wanted to, apart from him, advance my knowledge on modeling for games. And then I also wanted to learn how to create maps for games. And then, similar to Wesley, I wanted to become more confident in my speaking skills, so as he said, we'll see how it goes. And then big Siege projects we'll continue to work on in the future. So some research we had to do in order to make our game was to research how exactly to model and code. So on my part, I needed to research how to improve some of my really, at the time, bad 3D modeling skills and figure out how to rig, texture, and animate those models inside the program. I wanted, again, to make semi-realistic skin, metal, cloth, etc. Textures for the models we did make for our game. And I wanted to, again, learn about how to make map using Unity. So the programs we used were Blender for modeling and rigging, Unity is the engine for the game, and Visual Studio for syncing data, which, as you'll hear about later, didn't go as we hoped. Alright, so some inspiration we had for our project comes from several medieval-themed games, such as the Fire Emblem franchise by Nintendo and Intelligent Systems, and as well as the popular board game Dungeons and Dragons. And the gameplay for our game is inspired on first-person shooters that also have the ability to select a class that you get to play. Some of those classes can be rather fast and powerful, or slow but take a lot of damage, such as Team Fortress 2 and Overwatch. So our advisors for the project include John Salome, who is in the audience right now. I'd like to thank him for being here. Trey McKinstry, both of which helped us with coding and keeping things realistic, because within the course of a year you can only do so much. And our parents for moral support and some minor financial support.
So, Siege, as we have said before, has 3 playable classes. Now let's take a look at them. To start, we have the Squire, who, as you can see, looks like a knight from medieval times.
The Squire is a fairly balanced class, being moderate with his damage output, his hit points, and the speed that he moves. Squires historically are knights in training that were typically taught by a seasoned knight. And the Squire uses a sword and a shield in our game, meaning that he can block some attacks and deliver a powerful counter thereafter. The Squire, as you can see, is fully modeled. He is textured for both of the teams that would appear in a full version of the game, which would be light and dark. He is fully rigged and animated, and his weapons are also textured, modeled, and all that.
The next class we have in the game is the Archer, who we can see right now is highly based on Asian culture. So the Archer is someone who uses a bow and arrow for war, hunting, or sport. He can deal great amount of damage from distances based on the speed output of his arrow and based on how long you hold the bow in the shooting pose. And then if the arrow hits an enemy's head, it does a great amount of damage, we hope usually resulting in a one-hit KO. So like the Squire, the Archer, as you can see, is fully modeled and textured for both teams. And he is also rigged and animated with completed bow and arrow models.
And the last class that we have made is the Cleric. As you can see, she is female, unlike the other two. Alright, so a Cleric is usually a priest or a religious leader. And the Cleric's role in the game is to heal her allies. So that generally makes her a pretty great target, meaning that if you want to be healed at any given time, you have to protect the Cleric. But she is not completely defenseless either, and she can swing her staff to attack enemies. Just like the other two, the Cleric is fully modeled, textured for both teams, rigged and animated, and her staff is complete. Roadblocks. Earlier on in the year, both of our home computers broke, and that, well, Kieren's for an unknown reason, something with the hard drive, and my screen broke. Both were completely unusable, so that really damaged some of the progress that we had with the game. Another thing that went wrong was texturing and rigging the models in Blender took much longer than expected, and the progress was quite tedious, almost even enraging. And another thing that happened was Kieren, for some reason, couldn't get connected to Visual Studio, so we had to find a different way to sync our data.
So, as you can see, as with most games, you can expect glitches. So, more roadblocks we encountered with making the game was the textures we made in Unity or Blender actually had to be baked onto a model, which is basically putting all the textures on a flat surface to be wrapped around the model before we could put them into Unity. And if we baked all the textures, the results are horribly tedious. Kind of looks like he wants his suffering to end, if you ask me. And we couldn't have a character selection screen and multiplayer existing at the same time in our game. So, for those who have played it, that is why we can't have more than one playable character at a time.
Yes.
So in the game itself, the only class you can play is the archer. And sorry. Alright. All he can really do is pull arrows. It's kind of okay. Sorry. Okay. Everything runs smoothly, which is a relief, because if we did everything just to have it run like garbage, that wouldn't really be too amazing for us or anyone else who would want to try the game. But one of the upsides of the game is we actually have it connected to a LAN multiplayer, meaning that you can play with another person and basically just shoot arrows at each other until one of you dies.
So, now we have our project timeline to go over. Back in September, when we first got into the class, our goals were pretty simple. My brother needed to finish a basic humanoid model as well as finish the squire, while I, on the meanwhile, made the Icerise logo.
In October, I needed to research how to rig and texture models and begin building a basic game. I did not realize how long that was going to take, so building a basic game did not come until around December. Then I also needed to finish the archer's model, which the modeling in and of itself is fine. It's just, some of the long parts just happen when you're trying to get certain features to be absolute, and that can result in long periods of time just clicking and dragging different vertices. And over fall break, I needed to retexture the models, and as I said before, that took a lot longer than we originally expected. And lastly, I needed to finish the cleric's model. Everything was fine with the modeling itself, as I mentioned before. My brother, on the other hand, needed to research how to make he needed to find a map making program and complete a test map and research how to make props.
Little did I know, actually, when researching how to use a map making program, what you use to make maps in Unity is actually built into Unity itself, so that was handy.
Alright, so in November, I needed to research more coding in C# because basic games you can really only get movement and jumping, so, and even then there are still bugs that you need to work out. And I also wanted to move to getting more advanced things into our build of the game. But overall, texturing and rigging the models was kind of infecting my time, so I spent this whole debugging period mostly working on models because of that. And then I wanted to get some major coding done on the Squire and try to get him to a playable condition. my brother needed to make a health pack model, and also research how to make a heads-up display. For those of you that don't know what a heads-up display is, it's basically the data that you see on the screen that the other players can't see, such as your health, ammunition, and basically how the game is going. But
guess this is on me, but as I researched how to make a heads-up display, we were very much falling behind on our textures, so I had to give up completing on the health bar and start building an actual map at the time. So I had to move on to doing that later in the year. In December, Wesley had to do, well, more debugging, and then he also needed to do weapon models and have them complete by then. While winter break, we were going to get major work done on the Archer. Meanwhile, I wanted to complete ammunition, which isn't exactly in the game yet, as those of you who played it have found the exclusive strategy of spamming arrows nonstop. And still, because we were behind on the models, I still could not be able to do the map and had to continue texturing the models. And then in January, we were still working on the Archer class, of course, and we needed to get a Siege game mode in, but that couldn't happen because we were behind on both our textures, and suddenly now we were also behind on making the map for our game. And then we had mid-year presentations to work on, which is our halfway point to getting to where we are now. And I had to scrap a lot of stuff off my January plan just to make room for learning how to bake the models so we can import them into Unity.
So in February, I tasked myself with working on the cleric and getting her to a playable condition, and debugging more stuff, which it was around this time that we finally finished texturing the models and putting them into Unity. Yeah. And Kieren was tasked with assigning spawn positions to players on the map, which we couldn't really figure out. So if you played the game, after you die, you just kind of spawn back in the middle of the map. And the coding for health packs and ammunitions also had to be scrapped just for the purpose of figuring out how to freaking bake the models. In March, I tasked myself with making a basic AI so people could play against a bunch of other opponents, but coding for AI is a long and tedious process. We could not get it done in a mere month, not even remotely, because you need to code for a bunch of if-then statements, which are basically if there's an enemy nearby, then attack it. And you have to do that for almost everything that the AI does. So I scrapped that to make a character selection screen, but even after like a month of coding for that, we couldn't manage to get it to work without infringing on the LAN multiplayer. What would happen is, if there was a character selection screen, for some reason, other people's models would go completely invisible and you couldn't hit them. Kieren needed to help me with the with the character selection menu, but even with both of our efforts, that couldn't be done. So throughout the month, Kieren worked on the map that is in our game, and the map took, unlike a lot of things in this project, a lot quicker than we expected.
And finally, here we are in April. For April, we had to do a final debugging session, which, if I do say, went pretty well, seeing how our game is actually playable, and then work on our final presentation. Oh hey, it's our final presentation. And then, again, we had to scrap the win and lose screen because it's just one-on-one and constant respawns, and it doesn't make any sense for what we have in our game now. And the map did get finished textured this month. So, the future of Siege. We want to continue working on Siege and hopefully get it in a releasable state.
Yes, and in that releasable state, we imagine that there would be about 20 playable classes, including the concept art that you can see for 3 of the others. The Rogue, the Templar, and the Sister. There would be multiple maps in the full version of the game, and actual working class selection screens, as well as multiple game modes with different victory conditions, such as capture the fort or otherwise try to defeat as many opponents as you can in a time frame. Alright, this is our bibliography. Are there any questions?
Alright, if you were to keep working on it, what would you improve on?
I would definitely improve on some of the bugs that are in the game right now, such as when you load an arrow and you aim it, the bow and the archer's arm are still visible, making it quite a bit harder to aim, as well as I've said, like making a working class selection screen and figuring out a way to make a dedicated server so much more people can play on it. Yep.
As I think the new game, we had a mid-tier street arrows on that's close to crafting. I've tried making games before that just haven't done it, and that
Gravity in Unity with our code, we could just throw a variable in for gravity and we could specify what it was inside of the arrow. So it wasn't actually that hard, but yeah.
More questions?